if you don't mind, I just start the going live. So everything what we say will be now recorded and will be visible to all the people. So look out, no more jokes, very serious.
Okay.
Philippe, you're going to introduce each of the speakers, right?
With pleasure.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Yeah, with pleasure, with pleasure. So the proceeding will be, I will give a short presentation now for those people who are coming late. I know that there are always people coming late, so that they don't miss too much of the venerable speakers. I will delay the presentations for 5 more minutes, and I will just give a short introduction about Silk Road 4.0 so that people know a bit how everything was has started and how everything came up. So if there are no objections from the speakers, I will start with a very quick presentation. It is just a handful of slides just to let you know what is Silk Road 4.0. To welcome everyone to this evening with our very honorable speakers and presenters. So I would like to tell you a little bit about Silk Road 4.0. How Silk Road 4.0 started was, what can technology do? And if you think about it, it gets more and more obvious that nowadays it's not so much the challenge of what can technology do, but there is a paradigm shift. Then now the question is, what should technology do? So if you deal with technology, a lot of things are already very possible and can be done, but we are more and more tackling now the questions of ethical questions, what should be done, or financial feasible questions like, does it make any sense to include these solutions? Hello everyone, my name is Philipp Reinisch, and I'm the founder of Silk Road 4.0. So as I said, everything started in 2016 with a very technical question. So the question was, what happens if you take modern technology into the wild, out of the laboratory environment? And back at that time, we equipped a very old sidecar. It was 25 years old sidecar with some modern cutting edge technology at that time, I have to say. And I drove all around the Baltic Sea for 2 months, actually passing by Poland. And in 2017, a trip took place around the Baltic Sea. And then in 2018, some people said, Philip, do it again. But go to an area where it's not so much known, or where there is not a well-known ecosystem that you can relate to. So together with a couple of sponsors, we equipped a very modern motorcycle from a Japanese manufacturer. And then we equipped it again with even more sophisticated Internet of Things devices. And then I took this motorcycle all the way from Austria for 20,000 kilometers to China and back. And what I did during these 6 months of traveling, again, for one thing, exploring how those technologies behave along the road in terms of vibrations, UV radiations, and so on. But the second dimension was, for me, it was very interesting to see how is the innovation ecosystem along the route behaving. So I met a lot of people along the route. And then I realized actually there is a need for a connectivity platform. And everything starts with people, but the core of Silk Road 4.0 is technologies, and especially emerging technologies. And if you start connecting people, and if you start connecting technology, you very quickly run into the issue that actually nations are an artificial construct, an arbitrary organizational framework. But the point is, nowadays, the boundaries are totally vanished, totally changed. Think about Austria is actually very close to China in the times of cyber world. And out of these introductions and people that I met, other people joined Silk Road 4.0 and are now part of the extended network and partners of Silk Road 4.0. Also, I was very honored to meet very interesting companies within the last 5 years. And what I want to present to you today, and this is unique, you can't know it because this is the first time I'm presenting this, is the official framework, the time framework, the route of the year 2021 to 2022. So as we are virtually traveling from Berlin to Warsaw, where we are meeting our distinguished speakers. And then for the next year, we plan to continue making our presentations, our meetings every 4 weeks. And the idea is to stop in Beijing in February 2022. So this will be hopefully an on-site event, but for the time being, everything is designed as a virtual conference in the very same way we're just doing it right now. You will find this schedule in a post that it will go live tomorrow on LinkedIn. So feel free to look in detail if we are passing by your destination and your location. Again, the topics of this route will change every time. So we focus on different subjects. As you can see here, the upcoming event will be financing and banking in May in Czechia. And after that, the next event, it will be sustainability and environment in July in Vienna. But I jumped 1 month because in June, and this is exclusive to the members of Silk Road 4.0, we'll try out something new, and that is a joint road trip. The mission and the idea of Silk Road 4.0 was to travel together because by traveling, you really get to know each other, you really know the other person. But yeah, as you might know, there is a tiny little thing around us that prevents us from traveling. So we hope that at this weekend, it's a prolonged weekend, it's June 3rd to June 6th, we'll be able to make a road trip in Austria. I want to be honest, I don't know if it will be taking place, if we're able to do it, but at least we try to do it. I'm not sure if other countries and nations are able to join this road trip, but let's see. We were planning for it, and if it works out, all of us are happy, and if not, then we'll figure out something. But the good news is we really want to continue traveling. It's a motorcycle that you can see here, because a motorcycle by definition is the safest place for a joint traveling. But the idea, like always, is if somebody wants to join in with a car or with a truck or with an SUV or whatever other vehicle, of course, this person is highly welcome to join us. Okay, long talking by me. I'm not the focus of this event. I'm very honored to have a very exclusive group of people with us. I will present them and introduce them later once their presentations start, but just a short introduction. Pawel Panczyj, he's the Chief Development Officer from ABSL Poland. Welcome, Pawel. The second person is Professor Jerzy Langer. He's a member of the advisory board of the European Innovation Council. Welcome, Jerzy. And the third speaker will be Przemek Miszka. He's editor-in-chief of the Baltic Transport Journal. So we'll have enough, roughly 20 minutes presentations of all the speakers, and then in between 10 minutes of Q&A to every individual speaker. And then at the very end, we'll have an open discussion. And that brings me to the last slide for myself. Everyone who is watching on YouTube is also able to do so using Slido. So there is a barcode that you can use your mobile phone to make a picture of this barcode, or you can go directly to slido.com, and then if you enter the code 40563, you will be guided directly to the website where you can ask your questions. And I'm very happy to also present to you Dr. Harvey Zodin, who will help with moderation of this event. And he will then also ask the question to the speakers. He will read aloud the questions that we'll find on Slido. Maybe I start quickly with a short presentation from Harvey. Just turning off now the presentation mode. Harvey is former vice president of ABC Television. He's former presidential advisor of Jimmy Carter. He has been living in China for, I don't know how many years, Harvey, I think 15 years or?
Going on 18.
Yeah. So Harvey is also a frequent commentator on CGTN, on Chinese Global Television Network, on China-related topics. So he's also an expert in everything related to television, but also in China and Chinese. So without further ado, I would like to come to the first speaker. It's Pawel Panczyj. Thank you very much, Pawel, for joining us. It's great to have you with us. Pawel is the Chief Development Officer of ABSL Poland, and he will talk a bit about outsourcing slash the title of his presentation will be Open Talent Economy as the Platform for Successful Cooperation Between West and East. How to utilize the post-COVID lessons in strengthening globally distributed outsourcing networks. And as I said, Pawel is the Chief Development Officer of Association of Business Service Leaders. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward for your presentation, Pawel. The floor is yours. Please feel free to share your screen if you feel.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's nice to be a part of that road trip, although even if it's only virtual. I would like to provide a couple of information about my background and the organization that I represent. It's a national representation of business service sector companies, which are usually associated with outsourcing. We have representation in Poland, but also in other CEE countries, among others in Czech Republic, Romania, in the Baltics, in the Balkans, and just recently we signed an agreement of cooperation with Albania. I would like to touch the topic of cooperation between East and West and the potential lessons that Europe can learn from China and China can learn from Europe based on the recent revolution that has happened not just in one place, not in one continent, but I would say globally. All of a sudden, sooner or later, we became grounded because of the COVID-19, which was a general test to whatever life we have been leading before. It wasn't a situation that people had a choice. In some locations in the world, it was simply forbidden to leave your home. So whatever life you had outside of your habitat was shortly interrupted. The consequences are quite grave, and although it has been 12 months, we are still suspended in being able to predict the future. Some of the businesses made the decision to try to come back to the previous world, and they failed because 1 or 2 cases of COVID brought upon them complete lockdown. So having the experience of the last 12 months, I would like to concentrate on the lessons learned and the platforms provided by the experience that we have gained in the last 12 months. If you allow me, I will switch to my presentation and I will concentrate on a couple of aspects that are important for better understanding where we are, what we can do, and how we can foster the exchange of experiences. Looking at the post-COVID crisis, we have come to the conclusion at the conference organized by ABSL and BCG in June 2020, which was only 3 months after the outbreak of COVID in Poland, that we have 3 aspects or 3 takeaways that as early as 3 months later and still binding are quite important for planning our business activities. Because of the broken links with the places that were supporting whatever we were doing business-wise, a lot of companies oriented on nearshore or inshore, which is trying to do whatever they do business-wise as close as possible to the headquarters. The second aspect was digital. Because of the fact that we were grounded, we turned into the only way opening the world to us, and that was digital approach and digital contact. And the third aspect that was present more or less in the previous business model, but was strengthened by the fact that some of these events took place almost overnight, was agile. So nearshore, digital, and agile is the general cap of what we are doing right now. Going a little step down, 3 imperatives for a successful post-COVID navigation is trying to understand how to de-risk if it's possible, because all of a sudden we hear about the new outbreaks and the new models or the new viruses, but de-risk global delivery, whatever we are doing, if these are services or production, and understanding the place and the role of the resource model. The second, related to the second takeaway, is accelerate digital and cost transformation. Of course, cost is always running the business, but in a situation of a threat to human life, we were not able to present it as number one argument. So we had to accelerate the digital to rescue the cost transformation. And the third one, because we were cut off from the places where we had our business activities, we had to establish the new work model. The new work model is on one hand also business model, but also is related to how to use and utilize the talent that we work with and based on. So the results or the actions to be taken are accelerating the emphasis on value add. No longer having a threat to life, we could concentrate on the cost and the benefit, the financial benefit. The value add is something that gained importance because that's an imperative in the situation when we are no longer able to do it the old way. We had to revise outsourcing scope and ratios, trying to look at abilities to do business, to keep, first of all, the continuity, but not to relate on the previous scope. And the third result is bigger distribution and a remote model. And especially in the business services, work from home or work from anywhere is becoming the more permanent solution. So looking at the rules that are running our businesses and our activities in general is the health and safety, tracking and making sure that whatever we do for and with our employees is not putting any threat on how we do it. We had the urge for a real-time demand and supply, so we were no longer able to plan in large stocks. We had to save whatever we were doing business-wise based on the minimum, not the maximum. Higher resilience. Resilience was the number one word that created or made businesses. Those that were more resilient were more successful. Automation push and higher flexibility of workforce. This is what allowed mainly business services to survive, because no one is able to transfer production to your homes, but the businesses in business services can be provided based on the access to the laptop and the Wi-Fi. Accelerated digital and cost agenda. So everything that we did speeded up, where I remember guys from P&G or Cisco or JP Morgan saying, we were going to do this in 4 or 5 years. Now we had to do it in 4 or 5 days. Actually, the business transfer to the work from home in Poland in 82% happened in 3.2 days in the business services companies. This was the competitive advantage of the European locations over other locations in the world. And that's what created the new perception of Europe as not the old hub, but once again, the new hub. And then whatever we do with people and for people is related on the leadership. So the leadership style and culture responding to the work from home and to the digital model. These are the ground rules or the general rules based on which we are trying to make sure that we understand where we are. Looking at the production, I'll be speaking about the services, but the production in Europe seems to bounce back in 98% to the situation from end of April, from end of February or beginning of March, which shows that most probably in production, the cost benefit and the profit will be the main elements that will recreate the old models. But if we look at the Chinese examples and compare the manufacturing and the services, we can see that services bounce back faster to the previous level or even exceeded what was achieved before. And Chinese example is much higher. Of course, it happened much earlier, but also had a bigger fierce reaction to the general situation. So looking at this, I would like to concentrate on the services no longer understood as the back office activities, because being asked about the role of business services in general business, I usually say, try to imagine any global company producing something and issuing invoices. Based on these invoices, there is a flow of capital and cash. If anything happens and those invoices are being stopped issued, you will not get the money. So that's how the importance and the strength of business services is explained. Looking at the general trends in shared service and BPO in Europe, we can say that this was probably the part of the European economy that survived or even came out stronger, showing the resilience and showing the sustainability. Looking at the previous model, we see that the cost difference is no longer important, because if we work from home, we can work from anywhere. The new locations previously not suitable for providing hubs for business services based on the office space, the real life office space. Now when it's virtual or work from home, the new locations came out as the support of the business services. New destinations in EMEA region came to the existence, like Bosnia, smaller places that had the people. It was maybe difficult to travel, but Wi-Fi traveled faster than the train or even the fastest planes. So the situation discovered new locations and a new backup. And tier 2 and tier 3 cities became more and more important. So looking at the new work model, because this is what defines what I'm going to talk about. The new work model, if you look before the COVID-19 and after, is that 61% was practicing work from home or work from outside of the office in less than 5%. Now that 5% is only on the level of 9%, and then 25 to 50 is almost 30%, and 10 to 25. So the average work from home previously was less than 10%. Now the average is more than 30%. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we had, or even just before the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, we had a test where 7 Warsaw-based companies offered their employees work from home up to 3 days. All the 7 companies and the employees said, great. And then 2 weeks later, 5 of them came back and said, we want to work from home only 1 day, which was based on the fact that the generation that the average age is 31 preferred previously to keep the contact and work together. Now, 12 months later, 78% of the employees within the sector says they would like to keep the model 3 days from home, 2 days from work, or even more drastic, out of 31 days in a month, only 4 to 5 days from the office, which shows the mental shift. The question is, are we ready for mental shift? That strong mental shift. The challenges of the future, and you may find this slide chaotic because that's what it is. It is a lot of aspects that became much stronger in the situation where our world collapsed. I have to tell you one really frustrating story. Out of 350,000 employees working in the business services sector in Poland, 18% of them is experiencing mental challenges. There is a growing number of suicides among these people. Why? Because their world has collapsed. If you are 30, 35, and for the last 5-6 years, right after finishing your studies, you have worked in the business services sector where the world was put in order, and all of a sudden this world collapses. You think you can do it, but more and more often you start lacking the continuity, the positive routine that you had in your life that was allowing you to have the life-work balance. And even more frustrating, 40% higher divorce ratio just in Poland within the last 12 months. This shows you that the generation was not ready for that fast change. Whenever you have closer physical contacts with your peers, like in the production, the numbers are much lower. But in the business services sector, the frustration is higher. So when looking at what we discovered as open talent economy offering the global and unlimited resources, we see it as the benefit, but we have to remember about the backfires that we were not aware. So looking at the open talent economy, that may be a creator of the new work reality. You can work from anywhere. You have to juxtapose cost versus business model and redefine it. The onboarding is much simpler. The time zones where you work sometimes is not that relevant. Business continuity is guaranteed because you have within the same process different people in different parts of the world. But the question is, is the world talent pool enough for us? Looking at the way to establish that close global cooperation that we may think in terms of, for us, Europe and China, but we may also look at the more global situation. And this is what a positive outcome of the COVID-19 may be. The globalization that was speeding up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then at the 2000s was opposed by nationalisms and radical movements, now within the business services sector is happening much faster because the technology offers you availability of connection anywhere in the globe. The mobility, the talent, independent from geographies. You can split the project and you can implement it wherever the talent is available. The ongoing changes and on-demand talent supply supports these fast changes. Form of contract, it was more and more popular B2B model. Now it most probably will be prevailing model. New teams. Previously, if there was a site selection for certain specific operations, you were placing all type of operations within business in one location. Now, if you see that the talent offers faster and higher quality services, you can have the team run from one office, but then the team members can be in different parts of the world. The new teams require the new structures, but what's also very important, this kind of work within the business services sector offers the constant education. Once we were comparing the managers and their levels working in the banks and in the business services supporting banks. If you had a manager running a branch of a bank for the last 5, 6, 7 years, he was usually working with one scope of people in Poland, mainly using Polish language, reporting to the head that was probably in the same city or at the latest in Warsaw. While the manager from the business services sector for the last 10 years has been working in the global and international environment, using different foreign languages, reporting depending on different reporting lines to 2, 3, or 4 people in different parts of the world. So the management level in traditional institutions and business services working on the open talent model is really different, and it's much higher. What we are looking at is also different types of tools that are available. And right here you see different formulas or different tools supporting the recruitment of people all over the world, supporting the new open talent economy or open talent sourcing, as we call it. So whatever I have just presented to you was concentrating maybe on a specific part of the global economy, which is business services. But the business services gaining more and more importance in the business model of each and every company. Maybe a shift that is a signal that we should start rethinking the business model, the production model, and also the cooperation model. So looking at this, I would like to leave you and also at the same time open the discussion with a statement that employees of the future is an agile workforce with multiple skills offered in an open talent economy globally. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If there is anything that you would like to ask about, I'm at your disposal, as we have, I think, a little more than just 10 minutes.
Pawel, thank you very, very much for a very interesting presentation to show just how much the world has changed. So I have a few questions, and I have some questions from Professor Lewis, Don Lewis, as well. So based on your presentation, how would you say that it's going to work out in the future in terms of the split between home and office, and how much is necessary? What's the minimum you think is necessary in the office? Because people work at home, but then they don't have the same communication with their colleagues. We're on Zoom. Zoom is not the same as being at the water cooler or in the cafeteria or whatever. So how do you think this is going to balance out in the future?
Well, you have hit the most accurate question, and if I knew the answer to that, I would be probably as rich as Bill Gates, because everyone actually is asking, what are we going to do? Asking about the model. I mean, not just developers asking, will we be able to keep the people in the square meters that we built for them? It's one thing is the workspace environment. And what we see now is that companies are not planning more ahead than 2 to 3 years. They say, let's say we have 100 square meters. The model now will be based on 3 questions. The first one is, we are talking to our employees and we will ask them how often they want to come to the office. Then we will have to look at ourselves and see how often we want to see them in the office. That may be similar, but that also may be different, because IT people, they say we don't have to be in the office at all. You know, famous statement from Twitter, our employees will never have to work from the office again. We have had similar situations in Poland where some of the companies said, we will hire you, but you don't have to come to the office anytime. So, and the third question will be how to distribute the processes so we can do them efficiently, but be more agile and resilient. So now what we see, companies are trying to limit their take-up of the office between 40 and 60%, either introducing the 3/2 model or trying to use the office space as the place of creative thinking. So it will no longer be a place of a teamwork. It will be a place of exchanging ideas, first of all, of transferring the DNA of the company, because that's one of the biggest challenges. If you hire someone and that person has not even had to come to the office to pick up the laptop because it was delivered by a delivery company, how can you make sure that he will stay with you longer than a year or 2 or 3, when someone may call him tomorrow and tell him, I'll give you, 300 US more, why don't you work for me? And working from the office, he doesn't have to go anywhere. He can say, okay, I switch. So the transfer of the DNA will be done within the office space, because that's the place where it's easy to do it. Some companies say this will be the place where we will keep just the managers running the teams globally, because we have to have someone that we can control, and we can control them here. Another aspect is related to the suicide ratio. I mean, people staying outside of their usual tracks, they are not able to control themselves. I mean, yes, the creativity and productivity fell in the first 3 weeks 30%. Now it's somewhere between 98 or 112%. But how long will it be like that if you are no longer keeping the employee related to you as a company or as a person? So now between 40 and 60, but it may change.
And that's going to mean actually that companies and businesses will have to learn how to provide new services and to provide new kinds of outreach to their employees. And employees, in turn, will have to be motivated to contact the companies for like ancillary services, like you mentioned about these unfortunate suicides and things. So it's a whole new brave new world, I guess.
It is. If you're looking at Mercer, who is trying to understand the benefits switch. When you were working in the office, it was a Nintendo in your office. It was fresh fruit. It was gym membership. Now they want to have private meetings with psychologists or psychiatrists working from home. What's interesting is that this COVID generation working in the business services sector with 31 average age, they are not afraid to speak about their mental challenges. They are open enough saying, I need that. So thank God they communicated. But, looking at the whole life, it has changed. Of course, we do realize that the 31 is the average age in CEE. In Western Europe, it's 47. So, millennials and the baby boomers, they have completely different approach. For them that have seen many changes in life, it's easier to accept it and adapt. So they complain about the fact that their working day is extended. The younger generation complains about uncomfortable wheelchair, chair, or a desk or something like that. It is a testing ground of the future economy and global business services sector, because of the speed of changes that happen there.
Okay, and you mentioned about people working from different parts of the world. You mentioned Egypt as an example.
Sure.
So, and you also mentioned about the meshing with the corporate culture.
Yes.
So what's that going to mean also for cities in, let's say, in Europe? Is that going to mean a net outflow to these other countries? It seems like it's a classic case of danger and opportunity at the same time.
It is. I mean, you see, if you have locations that are not as attractive as tier 1 cities, previously it was difficult to attract people to move and work from there. But now, if you live there already and you are not asked to move to the office, you can work from the place that you have lived all your life and get the wages of Warsaw or Krakow or the capital cities. So generally, it will level the remuneration in larger areas. It will also create a chance for smaller locations to provide employment for their inhabitants, and at the same time move up the quality of life, because they will be working from there and they earning more money. They would like to have better life. But for cities like Warsaw, people may start leaving, going back home, because the quality of life is much higher in smaller towns and villages. So it is a classic, give and take challenge.
And Carly, who's in Switzerland, he's asking, will office space be converted for a residential space on a large scale, do you think?
I don't think so. Okay, maybe in 50 years, I don't know, if no one wants to work there. But right now, the large office spaces are more turned into flex office, which is the same office but rented out on a shorter terms, or to co-works. Like, I'm sitting in Mindspace. This is the place available for hours. So it would be too costly, and the whole structure of the office is not appropriate for residential. But it may happen in some times that I wouldn't say they will be turned into. They will be demolished if there is no need for an office space, and the new residential areas will be built up. Right now, it will be switched to flex and co-works.
Okay. And Eve is asking, I wonder what these requirements of the open talent pool will mean for the employees. More flexibility, but also a less stable environment?
You see, definitely more flexibility, but is it less stable? Depends on your understanding of stability, or depending on your understanding of work-life balance. I mean, if you know that you do not have to leave your home and you can switch because there is such a huge demand for IT specialists, I don't think it will influence very much the level of security, but definitely it will elevate the level of flexibility at work.
And one last question, I think, Philippe, because I know we're under time constraints. So I'd like to ask a question from Michele, and he's asking, what's one thing that we should take away from COVID-19? So I guess he means, what's the biggest transformational thing that's happened? You covered so many of them,
Sure.
And it's truly revolutionary. So what's number one on your list? What's the big change?
You can look at this question from two angles. The first one is a scary one. So I could tell you, be ready that the worst thing may happen overnight. But then looking at the agility of the generation and the agility of business, I can tell you anything that will happen will make you stronger. If you apply agility in your business model, if you put a lot of effort into digital, and if you understand the strengths of different parts of the world, so you know where to turn to for help.
Thanks very much. Very enlightening.
I like ending on a positive
enlightening
note.
and frightening.
Well, I mean, it's like Groundhog Day. I mean, you should, in situations like that, you should wake up every day thinking there is no past. There is only what's ahead of you.
And I think it will be very interesting to see how virtual reality will change everything. So this is the venue that we are using to meet for the networking part. Once the mimic and the facial expression will be incorporated into the speaking, I think then it will get a totally new spin, because at the moment it's something different. But once it's really copying the real life interaction, then I think it will be a boost to the whole social interaction. Sure. Thank you very much, Pawel. It was a very interesting talking or listening to your talks. So just for the audience, there is the opportunity to ask Pawel some questions at the end of the presentations. But there are two more also very, very interesting presentations upcoming. And I would like to welcome Professor Jerzy Langer as our next speaker. And I have to say, the CV of Jerzy, it was really impressive, I have to admit. So I have 6 screens in front of me, just to let you know that it's I think 1.5, or let's say, yeah, maybe 2 meters of screen width that I have in front of me. And it's not possible to show the full scope of the CV of Professor Langer on all the screen. So, sorry, I excuse myself, but I have to read it because impossible to remember everything. So he's member of the advisory board of the European Innovation Council. He is emeritus professor Institute of Physics of the Polish Academy of Sciences and president of the Warsaw Scientific Society. That's the easy part. And the reason why I can
maybe
relate.
That's enough.
That's enough? Oh no, I have prepared.
No. Just put this somewhere on the shelf, and if somebody's interested, so we'll read it. Let's better get to your meeting.
Lovely. Okay. So Professor Langer is kindly speaking today more from the European perspective. So what is the European innovation? What needs to be done? What can be done? What are the latest developments? But I don't want to talk too much than myself. Jerzy, it's a big honor to have you with us. Thank you for coming, and I'm really looking forward for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. And of course, thank you very much for the invitation. It's very strange because I'm a scientist by education and training and more or less mindset. And of course, I was involved a little bit to business life. For instance, I was responsible for a couple of years to create a billion zloty, which is $250 million research center in Poland, and I was a ministerial guy as well. So I think in my already quite long life, I had the chance to have quite various perspectives. And I must confess that when I listened during the last half an hour, the story, how the business, the service business is changing, I feel kind of a deja vu. Because when I was young, I passionately read science fiction. And what we listened to a moment ago, it's not anymore science fiction, it's a reality. And I've chosen a title of my sort of reflection. What are the problems and global problems that we have to face in terms of talents of work, science? I've made a choice of a quotation from 16th century poet, which is perhaps everybody knows because of Hemingway book. And so if you don't mind, I just open the presentation and then it will be simply easier to go. So the quotation says, "For whom the bell tolls, it tolls for us." And it sounds rather sad, but in fact it is not. And John Donne was a 16th century poet, and known for a kind of metaphysical approach. And like with every poet, especially those on the top of the poetry, they are kind of prophets. And therefore this question and the statement it holds for us is not just pessimistic. It's just asking for a reflection. What next? Where are we? And like Pawel just telling a story of his business, how dramatically it changed over the last couple of months, I think that we have to stop for a moment and sit, look for numbers, just look around, and then think, if not about ourselves, it's our children, our neighbors, our friends, because the world is really dramatically changing, but at the same time is slowly evolving from Roman, Egyptian, Chinese times to today, and very likely will go on this track. So I don't think that everything will speed up because there is one limitation, the speed of light, and you cannot go faster than that. All right, so let me go to the first slide, which will be the first point of reflection, which means where are we, and is Europe so important? And if so, what may happen in a couple of years from now? And from this slide, you can see that 60% of the population of the globe is in Asia. Only 3% in Africa, which many people tell that this is the origin of mankind. Europe is just a mere 10%. And it's completely different story if we talk about the GDP contribution, and it changes dramatically in time. That is more or less a few years ago. It's not the most recent data, but the story is clear that Europe and North America are major, let's say, producers of the wealth. But this is not going to happen in a couple of years from now, because the prediction is that current 2/3 of, let's say, wealth production by the Western world, in 40 years, I think much faster, will shift to Asia. And from this slide, you can see that the tiny, relatively tiny Chinese part of the cake becomes enormously large and will become enormous. Does it mean that China will overcome the world? Well, this is a speculation I don't want very much to enter. But we have to remember that. And all of that, as a physicist mind tells me, is like with water. You can put a dam upon the river and you can cross the river with some artificial construct, but there is a gradient because there will be much more water up there and much less down there. So sooner or later, you cannot stop this water flowing. And demography is what really shall govern coming years. Asia is much more populated, and with the help of modern technologies, the distance is not anymore of a value. Now you can see how things are changing in the production language. This is only a small part because everybody drives cars, and the fewer and fewer are cars not from Asia. Korea, once a very poor country, now is a giant, not only in car production, but also electronics. And here on this slide, you can see the batteries which were developed, of course, in Europe and the US, now is a domain of Asia. And now, interestingly, the Asians are placing factories in Europe. Poland in Europe is a major producer of batteries. And of course, well, it's a very positive because this is a job for Poles, but this is highly automated production. But the problem is that this business is one of many which is very open to pollution. And therefore, maybe there's some wisdom now of Chinese to move out of their place something that is dangerous for their life. I don't know, but this is one of the questions which I would like to raise and ask the question whether it's true or not. Well, now, very serious point. You see, after two big dramas of the last century, people became happy and enjoying for more than 70 years of no major conflict in which weaponry was used. And there were books about World War III and the plans and generals, atomic bombs, and so on. But the point is, that is not anymore of importance. We are at war now. And what we are experiencing is the World War III, sorry to say. And here, just look for this count. Within a year, 3 million people died of COVID. And COVID, some people say it was man-produced. I don't think so. There's no indication. Maybe there's some connection to some laboratories, but it is not the point. The point is that the world was not prepared for such a dramatic intervention of nanostructures into our lives. And we simply didn't know how to deal with that. How to organize ourselves. So just look that during first year, practically the only tool that we used was known for centuries. Separate, isolate, put a mask. Of course, it was not the medication. It was trying to rescue the medical service. But who gave the chance to survive? Not generals, not officers, no big armies, no guns, nothing of that sort. Just science, just in our knowledge production, and knowledge production that was done years before. Within a year, a vaccine was produced. And that vaccine couldn't have been produced if it was not a great research effort over the last decade or so. And this new vaccine is completely new model, completely different from the vaccination that was proposed by Louis Pasteur or Koch or the others. It's a completely new story. It deals with the DNA, ERN, which is a basic element of our cells. And many people say, okay, that is the major input of science into this battle we are experiencing. I say, no, there is on the list, you can see much longer list. Well, the internet and the GSM technology. Today, we can distribute vaccine. We can look where are the centers of disaster using the quick exchange of information, using the internet and the GSM. But the problem is that we are now dealing with the numbers that are huge, of a size of mankind. So there is a problem, a big mathematical and information problem, how to deal with such a huge amount of data, which is big data handling. And finally, chemistry, pharma, solid state electronics, all of this is the product of the mankind science. And that is the most important message, which I think we should take. It's not armies, it's not generals who are important, not politicians, it's scientists. It's the business people who are taking up the knowledge from scientists and putting them into practice. Now, 3 big numbers important for our part of the world, which is Europe. Well, I just mentioned the most important group of people for knowledge production are researchers. And I will show you in a second that Europe lacks 1 million of people if the United States are taken as example. Now, what are the assets? One of these assets is students, young people Europe roughly is 500 million, and 20 million is the number of students today. And the last important number is more than 20 billion euro a year, $20 billion a year. It's a contribution which will come and comes from Brussels. And this is a product that the European Union exists. It's not a sum of countries. It's a joint effort and joint outcome that we have. Now, a very important map, because I mentioned about this deficit. On the map, the darkest, for instance, the Scandinavian countries is the largest number of researchers, the largest number of researchers in Scandinavia. And this is approximately 7,000 per million, or 7 or 8 per 1,000 inhabitants. And now you can see the other part. The United States is very high. Australia is very high. Russia is fairly reasonably doing. China is on the go. But it is really worthwhile to make such a comparison. So if we take just simply population, and we take as a reference the United States, so then we can see that Europe has a deficit of approximately 1 million of researchers, but China, 5 million. This is their challenge. If they want to match simply numerically the United States, they need 5 million more researchers to match the United States. And most of these people are not needed in institutions of higher education, the academies, universities, but in business. That's the next very important message that I would like you to carry on. Now, Europe and students, where is the resource? And that's very interesting, because most students, let's say a quarter of students, are in so-called a new part of Europe, former communist country or socialist countries. And today, Poland, which is approximately 40 million, today every 10th student in Europe is Polish, not necessarily studying in Poland. And I think that we have to look for these resources, not material resources, just man resources that are of importance. Now, I mentioned that the union, and the union is so important because the many countries gave up a little bit of their sovereignty and decided to make a union. Part of the union is the budget. And it's very interesting. If we take €5 that is being spent from budgets on research and innovation, €1 today comes from Brussels. It's amazing. This is the largest portion as a fraction of the budget spent on research. And of course, this money is not being spent in Brussels. No, it goes back to the member states. So the very next important element is that one aspect is a national effort, but the very important is possibility to change the picture from Brussels perspective. Of course, it's not there is no king, no queen, nothing of that sort. No. The way to distribute this money is going by consensus and a very big involvement of people coming from various countries like myself who are dealing with assessing programs, proposals, and this money then goes to countries. And here are these two biggest positions, and one is directly to innovation, while the second one, so-called cohesion money or structural funds, they will go back to member states, and half of that have to be used for innovation, research, but also new factories, new products. And that's a very interesting story. And it started about 10, 15 years ago. So here is the list. What are the major pro-innovation activities of the European Commission that takes more than 20 billion euro a year, which is quite a large amount of money. So you see, cohesion funds is the largest. Then we have very interesting European Investment Bank, loans and participation. And finally, this is a big research program. This is about 85 billion euro for 7 years, which is more than 10 billions a year, which is so-called Horizon Europe. And here, something that was not even thinkable a few years ago, that this money mostly will go to single people, single groups, single teams, very innovative, very open-minded people to do research or to start businesses. So the very big story is the European Research Council, it's so-called basic research. Money in terms of grants is given to top scientists after very tough scrutiny. And then the completely new one, because there are these few of importance, but the very important one is the new baby, which is European Innovation Council. And this European Innovation Council is a money which will be distributed in the form of concourses for research, but for small teams and SMEs. And this story really started a very short time ago. And all of this, what I said, is aimed at one crucial goal. Europe, like everywhere, is full of talents, reasonably or even very well educated. And now we have to stimulate, we have to find a way to stimulate these people to start their businesses or to go to labs and trying to reach stars in terms of new products, new ideas, or whatever. This is really a fantastic goal. And the Commission decided to go this track. And for instance, one of the big problems that Europe has is the number of unicorns. America is fantastic. China now, quite many of them. Europe, not so many. So one of the things that this European Innovation Council is aiming at is trying to boost already existing SMEs to become the unicorns of the future. And so we have two strands. One is the Pathfinder, which is mostly research, and the second is accelerated. And a very interesting final result, which is the EIC pilot. For the last 2 years, it was a big try to test this idea. And the interest in Europe was 20 times more than money available, and the money was big. It was 3 billion euro. So you can imagine what can be done if this story continues. So I would like to leave you with the thought that the most important today is not reshuffling of resources, is thinking about young generation, about talents. And the most important is to let them start their businesses, to be independent. And I think that Europe is doing reasonably well these days. As we are talking about China and America, well, I think the current trio, which means China or Asia, Europe, and the United States will stay, but hope not in a confronting way, but rather in a cooperative way. And I would like to leave you with this message, and I'm open now for a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. One thing I learned from you is I now know that you're smarter than Albert Einstein. You're a genius. Because, and I'll tell you why. Someone once asked Albert Einstein what weapons would be used to fight World War III. And he said, I don't know, but I know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. But you gave us many weapons that are going to be used and that are being used in the current World War III that we're in. So I have to say that we're lucky to have you, a genius who's smarter than Albert Einstein. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, very kind of you, but of course, extremely exaggerated.
And you mentioned John Donne, the poet. And as we all know, another relevant part of that poem is the beginning of it, that no man, or today we say no person, is an island. And I think that's what we're talking about today here, about how we're all interconnected, and then about how to best develop and also distribute money and talent and so on. So I think that that's very important. Somebody's asked, how does one get associated with the EIC, its activities, its funds, and so on? Or is it purely a governmental thing, or can private enterprises participate in it?
Okay, the answer is very simple. First, use the internet and type EIC, European Commission, and then you are guided to the web page. The first simple step. Point number two is, it is very simple. Everybody, but be prepared for a tough competition, can get there, and not only look for money in terms of grants, but also for advice, but also for equity. For instance, SMEs can give away a little bit of their freedom for equity, which will be a property in the hands of Commission, much safer than the VC. And they are running constantly contests so that you can submit your ideas in a very simple form, a few pages, and then if this is considered interesting, then you submit, let's say, more extended project, and everything is done relatively quickly in Brussels terms, which means approximately half a year. So within half a year, 9 months, you get money, advice, or whatever is needed. And there's one interesting element out of that. Don't be afraid to be a loser, because nobody's a loser. In terms of SMEs, approximately a third of SMEs submitting the proposals get the so-called Seal of Excellence. And the Seal of Excellence is a sort of a ticket that you take back home, and without any concourse, you can get the same amount of money from structural funds they are given to a given country from the Commission. So, which means that it dramatically amplifies the amount of money available. And also, this is a sign that you are worthwhile to look at. And the VCs already are lining up to get the information, who is there. So I think that the revolution is by multiple factor, which starts from 1 billion. And I think this billion is already worth at least 10 in terms of real money, and it will multiply by many, many times.
Okay. Professor Don Lewis in San Francisco is asking if the EIC has any plans to expand this innovation ecosystem collaboration beyond Europe to include China or other BRI countries, Belt and Road Initiative countries.
Well, I would say the following. This is a little bit too early to go like that, because first I'm a part of that. I'm very proud because about 10 years ago, I was the first one to propose the EIC to be created. And of course, now it's a big effort that people are doing. First, it has to be established, and the procedures, in some sense, they are, in terms of this accelerator, are taking example from DARPA from the United States. But of course, looking in 10 years from now, for sure, yet it will be done. For instance, the ERC is, let's say, more basic research, is already very international. Everybody can apply. And also the ERC with Japanese, Chinese partly, Americans are creating a super fund for research. So I think that currently the IP patents are not that important anymore. And I think that the world opens up to the new completely mindset. And in the final answer is that if there's a chance in a couple of years to talk, I think quite a lot of Chinese will benefit, and we from China as well.
And another follow-up from Don Lewis. He's asking if EIC has already identified breakthrough technologies and specific industries eligible for the EIC programs and funding that you mentioned.
Yeah, the answer is a double. For instance, when the COVID broke, so immediately a third of money available at that time was dedicated to whatever can be done against the COVID. So this is the agility, let's say, of this pilot phase. Now, approximately half of the money has no direction, which means any business can apply, provided it sounds interesting. But yes, there is a big work to identify it, and must be more or less in line with the union policy. For instance, a Green Deal is a big title, which means not only new clean energy sources, but also a clean deal, which means clean mind, which means a new business, like we've heard a moment ago from Pawel. It is also new technologies of chemical productions and so on. Digital Europe, it's another story. Artificial intelligence, which is a lovely toy for quantum computing for the people like you, Harvey, who are commenting live. So these things are reasonably well defined. And the most important element of that is it's not that big money is made out of that. The human aspect is most important, because one of the questions is being asked when anybody applies: what kind of benefits society will have out of this? And what is the social component of the research or business you are proposing? And that's a different from a VC approach. VC mostly ask you how much money I can get. The EU doesn't go that way, hopefully.
Eve is asking, he says there's a lot of R&D funding in the EU, but how well is the research, he calls it productionized, monetized? And he said, for example, lithium-ion batteries.
Okay, that is a very old question with the same answer perpetuating discussion over the last 100 years. Well, the point is that if you go to any professor at any university and ask this question, very likely he will be kindly ushered out of his room because he's not interested in that. But this is changing. And Europe has a particular problem because, as you know very well, modern science and modern approach to science starts from Europe. And therefore, Europe loves its hype of being wise and so on and so on. And it was left to those Americans who are not that cultural. But finally, Americans are buying into Europe, and that's okay. So Europe has really a long way to go to monetize research quick. And of course, the Chinese are very good at that. If somebody says the Chinese are copying, forget it. It's the past. Now, a lot of new knowledge is being produced. Super knowledge is produced by the Chinese. I mentioned artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, the place number one is China, not America, not Europe.
Good. And we have time for one more question before we let you off the hook. So Michele again is asking a very good question. He says, transfer from academia to industry, these are relatively common, but what about vice versa, he asks. I strongly believe, he says, it's much needed. You know, what's your valuable opinion?
Yes, part of my life I spent quite early in the United States. And it's a very good tradition that top guys in industry go to university and do the research and teach the people. And also the big industry are intervening the process of education and research at the quite early stage. And then they pick up these guys from like Hewlett-Packard, that taking people from Berkeley or Stanford, and then they more or less shape them their own way. So I think we have to learn from Americans how to do this. And I tell you, it's dramatically changing. In fact, it started from the UK language tradition, I don't know. Oxford and Cambridge as super universities are super places in terms of transfer, and they are not only creating businesses, but also inviting British businessmen in various forms. So I think now the water will go both ways.
Thanks very much for a very interesting presentation. And I think we're all pleased and honored to have a professor with your breadth of knowledge and who's smarter than Albert Einstein. So thank you very much.
Can you tell this to my wife, please?
Happy to.
Thank you.
But I have to second the opinion of Harvey. It was super interesting. Thank you, Jerzy. It was really a pleasure listening to you. I could continue listening for the next hours, I think. Thank you very much for the presentation. So for the audience, of course, there is the possibility to ask questions to Professor Langer at the very end of our evening. There's just one other third presentation. We are now coming to Przemek Miśka. He is the editor-in-chief from the Baltic Transport Journal, and he will even broaden up more the scope of our discussion. So we're focusing a little bit on Europe in the last presentation. And now we talk more about the global impact heading towards China, in particular, heading towards or using or following the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm very pleased to welcome Przemek here in our group. Przemek, it's a big pleasure. I'm looking very much forward to your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you very much for such a kind presentation of my person. Very much obliged. Analysts have long talked about the end of an American-led system and the arrival of an Asian century. This is now happening in front of our eyes. We need a more robust strategy for China, which also requires better relations with the rest of democratic Asia. End quote, Josep Borrell, European Union Minister for Foreign Affairs. In view of Margaret Vestager, EVP of the European Commission and Competition Commissioner, Europe needs, quote, to be more assertive and confident about who we are, end quote. At the same time, China's President Xi Jinping champions openness, which, according to Kai Streetmatter, author of expert books on China, should be read as the country's openness to scale up overseas while maintaining a tight grip on domestic affairs, including controlled access to the Chinese market. Are we therefore witnessing the end of EU's passive stance towards China's rising global presence? Are the Chinese ready to revise their Belt and Road Initiative to onboard more foreign partners? The following presentation is based on my article bearing the same title and available via my LinkedIn page. There you will find more details, including figures, tables, and maps. The article in turn was chiefly built on the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China's survey report under a telling title, The Road Less Traveled, European Involvement in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Over the years, what was meant to essentially better rail connect China and Europe grew into a global web of parties willing to tap into the BRI, including not only Central Asian, but also Western African and even South American economies. Politics in or out, a chunky looking cake was to be cut. That said, European businesses have come up against various entry barriers, insufficient information available, and non-transparent public procurement systems being the two most often brought in the Chamber's report. As a result, those who have participated in a BRI project have been brought on board by the Chinese, either by companies, mostly state-protected enterprises, or directly the government, quote, meaning that they were essentially handpicked to participate. Therefore, the competitiveness of these bids is essentially irrelevant in the absence of actual competition, end quote. Only a single interviewed party said they won thanks to having the most competitive bid. Quote, this filling the gaps role is very similar to European companies' participation in China's market in general, particularly with respect to public procurement, end quote. This want for transparency is magnified in how the BRI projects are financed, with nearly all backing coming from Chinese policy and or commercial bank or even Chinese companies themselves. While it might not come as a surprise that the World Bank, led by Western economies and Japan, is being blocked from access to the BRI, hardly any financing comes from the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the setup of which was proposed by China itself already back in 2013, and whose headquarters started operating in Beijing the following year. The multilateral nature of the AIIB, something that necessitates greater transparency and feasibility standards, as well as distributes control, is, it seems, what makes the Chinese steer clear from it. Moreover, European financial service providers avoid typical BRI infrastructure projects like setting up ports or railways, dominated by state-owned enterprises and heavily politicized. Instead, they prefer soft initiatives, especially carried out by Chinese privately owned enterprises. Quote, one interviewed representative states that while this has still led to meaningful increases in sales, European opportunities were crumbs from the table, albeit pretty big crumbs, end quote. That said, European banks are nowadays more frequently asked to manage finances before, during, and after project execution to make the whole venture more bankable, quote, a sign of progress for BRI-related projects that have often struggled to become profitable in the past, end quote. Unlike in foreign affairs, China prefers to address its BRI counterparts bilaterally. Similar to what's happening in global container shipping, the Chinese use vertical integration in their offerings, providing a suite of solutions, project management, financing, materials, construction, and post-completion service wrapped in a single package. This in turn is a potent allure for developing countries who want to kickstart their economies in a rapid fashion, pushing away concerns about debt trap diplomacy. But again, in a similar style to the container business, this vertical integration is meant to benefit the offerer. This has been, in fact, one of the sobering moments for a number of countries revisiting the terms of their cooperation with the Chinese, as well as looking around for ways to involve non-Chinese businesses, notably European. These discrepancies are reflected in the numbers of the Reconnecting Asia database. Out of all contractors involved in China-funded projects, 89% are Chinese, 7.6 are local, and 3.4 are foreign companies versus 29, 40.8, and 30.2 respectively, if the financing comes from a multilateral development bank. But if somebody can be portrayed as a successful European BRI story, is the quality and safety services, testing, inspection, and certification sector. Quote, as industry leaders in the provision of these services, European companies often have deep, long-held relationships with the project recipient countries, insisting on these conditions. So rather than just plugging certain capacity/technology gaps, some European service providers in the QSSTIC industry have been able to secure full participation in the handful of projects they are involved in from inception to completion, end quote. Certain cross-border projects also make onboarding non-Chinese partners welcome, if not entirely necessary, particularly when it comes to rail transports across the new Silk Road. Owing to various factors, among many the state-owned nature of the rail industry, it's best to split the whole between different local players. The same goes for organizing such shipments with the expertise of multinationals like DP, DHL beyond the reach of Chinese logisticians. Arguably, the BRI isn't solely about projects where return on investment is the focal point, with accusations going as far as saying that China is creating vassal states and securing trade lanes for vital imports like oil and gas. Then again, no other country has come up with a doable plan of connecting remote economies to the global market, this way opening doors to doing business in, for example, Central Asia by European companies too. Lack of robust infrastructure is what has been making assessing certain countries a logistics nightmare, a game not worth the candle import and export wise. Quote, "The BRI's railway story has been one of the most hyped and not without reason. The image of consumer goods being unloaded from containers that just crossed the Euro-Asian continent by train is a powerful way to positively influence public opinion and represents an undeniable achievement," end quote. There has been a lot of sweet talk on how rail and maritime transports do not compete but complement each other. The Chamber's analysis goes against the grain, saying there's a number of goods that are particularly suited to be shipped by train. Rather than take the often questionably reliable sea leg and freeze their working capital for at least a month, the Chinese car companies prefer to have their shipments with automotive components directly delivered to, for example, Chengdu or Chongqing in 2 weeks' time, quote, and at a cost that, while still more expensive than maritime shipping, remains relatively low per unit of high-value items, end quote. The same goes for other high value to weight ratio goods such as electronics or clothing. The picture has been, however, distorted for many years by hefty rail subsidies given away by the Chinese more than generously. While the Chinese central government has imposed a cap on the subsidies, local authorities have compensated for it, some of them vehemently. The Chamber reports, quote, "This creates an absurd distortion where it is cheaper to ship goods produced in Xinjiang west by first going 1,000 kilometers east to Xi'an, where they enjoy local subsidies to go back west," end quote. While the Chinese Ministry of Finance talks about eventually abolishing subsidies altogether, quote, "As long as the success of the BRI carries such a high political value and that demonstrating successful BRI-related work remains highly advantageous for advancing government careers, other ways would be sought by officials to maintain high usage of the railways, with their cities still functioning as major hubs," end quote. Another issue is that trade flows across the new Silk Road aren't balanced, with significantly more laden containers heading west than back to Asia. More or less for every euro worth of goods going east, 2 euros head west. To balance trade, a number of steps can be taken. For example, China could lower tariffs on goods that are suitable for transporting by rail, agriculture, food, beverages. Second, more dangerous goods could be rail shipped. This would, however, require aligning customs and safety regulations across the multiple jurisdictions that sit along the new Silk Road, as well as the setup of proper handling stations, not to mention their proper oversight, as nobody wants another Tianjin explosion-like event to happen. Other improvement venues include digitalizing custom procedures, something which could save up to 2 full days, according to one interviewed executive. Sorry. Having mentioned digitalization back in my first China-focused article from 2016, the Digital Silk Road, DSR, was just briefly touched upon as a more of a concept than a tangible suite of projects, nor a top-down, well-ironed out strategy. Quote, but the geopolitical world has changed tectonically since 2015, and the DSR is becoming an increasingly important part of the BRI and could emerge as a vehicle through which Beijing pushes for an alternative to what it sees as a US-dominated technology world, end quote, reads the will China control the global internet via its digital Silk Road analysis. The DSR will be another means of scaling up Chinese state-owned enterprises overseas. Enjoying the privilege of its own protected market and more or less open access to US and European ones, China's tech giants target adding the digital backbone to BRI's infrastructural projects and as such influence the wording of future global IT standards, especially 5G, blockchain, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence through accomplished facts. Quote, industry insiders have reported that larger Chinese firms are establishing entire ecosystems of their software that operate within more closed-source systems. This allows them to either play kingmaker to companies that want to license out their services under the larger set of standards within that specific ecosystem, or to simply occupy the entire space themselves, end quote. Another motivation will be playing with the appeal of entering China's market. Companies just need to be sure not to make the mistake of investing in solutions that do not work when 1/5 of the world's populations reside. The chamber tables a few recommendations should Europe decide to level the playing field with the Chinese Communist Party, two of which stand out: the use of the international procurement instrument and the rollout of the EU-Asia connectivity strategy. The former would be, quote, a pragmatic mechanism to match China's degree of market closedness in certain areas. In essence, it would compel Chinese firms accessing the EU market to operate under the same restrictions that European companies face in China, with the intention of incentivizing positive reciprocity, end quote. The EU-Asia connectivity strategy is of a more, strategic nature. Jerzy Katainen, Vice President for Jobs, Growth, Investment and Competitiveness in the Juncker Commission, described it by saying, quote, we want to work with our Asian partners to improve connections between Europe and Asia while bringing our values and approach in doing so. Infrastructure networks that will be built should be coherent, interoperable, as well as financially and environmentally sustainable. Calls for tender should be open and transparent to promote good governance and a level playing field, end quote. The European Union's BRI in short. However, the chamber notes 60% of its survey respondents did not hear about the strategy. It stands to reason that the PR machinery behind the BRI has done a marvelous job of publicizing the scheme, whereas the strategy has been lost amidst other affairs, not to mention that it's the Trans-European Transport Network, TNT for short, that garners the most attention EU-wide. Nevertheless, there appears to be a growing understanding that an alternative must be provided. Parag Khanna, author of The Future is Asian, warns, quote, it is very dangerous to view Asia only through the prism of China, because that not only betrays history, it also sets up a very dangerous self-fulfilling prophecy. Cooperation between Europe and Japan is a step towards making sure that doesn't happen, end quote. Though troubled with a number of minor and major problems, the EU's attempt cannot be discarded as a defeat even before the clash started. The development of the TNT is ongoing, with prospects of extending it to neighboring countries. There's a set of 13 billion euros road and rail projects to be carried out across Eastern Europe and the Black Sea by 2030. The EU has established ties with Asian economies, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan, that might, because of their jagged historical relations, mode of governance, and economic rivalry, hold cold feelings towards China's BRI. Quote, "This is why Chinese initiatives in countries like the Philippines are encountering steady competition from Japanese and Korean projects, which are generally seen as more reliable in terms of delivery and as upholding higher quality standards," end quote. But perhaps the BRI is changing itself. During the first Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation, the focus was put, quote, on the size, the scale, the sum of capital and play, and the number of countries that had signed up, end quote. But rather than tread carefully, they overestimated the value of cash in project execution, while, quote, "Many European business leaders noted that the relative success or failure of Chinese companies involved in the BRI, both private and state-owned, has been largely based on their level of experience in other markets," end quote. Some went even further, quote, "The big rush of outbound investment and construction projects in the early days of the BRI and the associated go-out policy led many companies into difficult positions, with one state-owned enterprise executive saying with one state-owned enterprise executive saying that the then called One Belt, One Road has ensnared inexperienced companies in the One Belt, One trap," end quote. The 2019 forum brought a change of atmosphere. Quote, "Several European companies have noted that Chinese companies are decreasingly reliant upon importing Chinese workers to complete projects, choosing to invest more in local human resources instead," end quote. Although a positive change, this cannot be taken as a proof that the entire BRI scheme is opening and that China will remove fundamental barriers, for example, the negative list for foreign investments. Beyond a doubt, commerce is what has been, if not uniting, then at least connecting the two blocs for many years. Europe's reserve, in contrast to Trump administration, has foreboded unleashing a full-blown trade war. But there are limits to everything. Europe demanding reciprocity and reaching to its Asian partners to counterbalance the BRI, whereas China asserting a combative attitude vividly nicknamed wolf warrior diplomacy. The two are dropping the sweet talk, facing each other, as we say in Poland, in a somewhat medieval and militaristic fashion, with the visor open up. That was the content, which is king and queen. Now is the time for a shameless plugin. We have been reporting on the various aspects of the BRI and the new Silk Road, trade, transport, politics since 2015 at least. The coverage has been growing steadily to now include regular internet news beats on the new Silk Road transport services, the Made in China news column in our journal, articles of course, but what I'm particularly proud of, my brainchild, the new Silk Road map, probably the most comprehensive one on the market. The latest version from 2020 is available as a PDF. Please connect with me on LinkedIn and I'll be merry as a cricket to share the link. Other than that, a tip of the hat for kindly tuning into my presentation.
Thanks very much. Very interesting. We're running a little bit late, but it's okay. We're still going to ask some questions. And I have a question that you didn't directly touch on, but you seem to be one of the world's authorities on transport. So tell us your opinion about what happened in the Suez Canal and what lessons are there for BRI and for transport generally for the future.
Oh my gosh, this is one of my one of the topics I have been reporting for a number of articles now. I must say that what happened in the Suez Canal was almost inevitable. It was a consequence of what's happening in global container shipping, especially what I call the container tug of war, meaning essentially that the biggest players are investing in bigger tonnage, those mega behemoth ships, which are 400 meters long. And if something goes wrong, either with the weather, either with the human factor, or with the machinery, we have a situation like the Suez Canal. So I think that now, when the situation is okay, nothing will change, because the game is still on, and the global shipping lines and the alliances they are involved in there are preoccupied in the first, the second, and the third place with their bottom line. They are not interested in the efficiency of the whole supply chain. There's a set of reports from the International Transport Forum. It's on a specialist agenda of the OECD. And according to their data, the whole container tug of war is decreasing the efficiency of the whole logistic chain globally. So fortunately, we have alternatives like the new Silk Road, or rather we should say roads, because as you could see on the map, there were 18 corridors thanks to which you can connect Europe with Far East Asia. And it has been a market for its own. It doesn't have the capacity. You can compare a train that has, say, 50 or 60 containers on it, in comparison to a container ship which can now take up to 23K. So the capacity is just not there, but there are companies, shippers, freight forwarders, logistics companies, which sometimes prefer to pay more in order to get faster delivery times. And what's crucially important also, reliability, because when you go by ship, the timetable can be all over the place, and as said, nobody in the container shipping line pretty much cares about your container. So it will be unloaded in the port when it will be unloaded, but it's completely different kettle of fish when it comes to rail transports. Their selling point, their marketing pitch is that you will have your goods delivered to Europe or to China in 10, 12, 14 days, plus a couple more days for the last mile delivery. So yes, it has been a very viable alternative, and also a very useful one when something bad is happening. For example, a couple of years ago, there was a big port strike in the Swedish port of Gothenburg, and shippers and logisticians and freight forwarders were looking for different ways of getting in and out containers, including tracking them to, for example, the port of Hamburg or to Duisburg, just to get them on the train and say to whatever recipient party is in China that we are sending our goods to you. Don't worry, because we know that your business is very much dependent on our Swedish goods. So it comes in handy.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know, my signal froze for a moment. I don't know if anybody else did, but it was a great presentation, and I think I hope that we'll have more opportunity to discuss these issues in the future. But don't go away, because we have a few more minutes, and we want to ask all the panelists one or two questions, and you can interact, and hopefully we can generate some light, but also some heat. So based on all the presentations and what we know about China these days, so is it game over? Is China won? Have they done so much work on AI and spent so much money on research and development and so on that the US, EU should just pack up and go home or not? Anybody, please.
Can I?
Sure.
I think that it pretty much depends on the scenario we are heading towards. The author I have mentioned, Kai Streetmatter, the Polish translation of his book, which was originally We Have Been Harmonized, was translated into Polish, which would be translated to English like Creating a Digital Dictatorship. It's a very thought-provoking book. So what we know about China and their internal affairs, I think that if we are heading toward the digital dictatorship scenario, they would have the upper hand. If we would be heading for a scenario of unhinged capitalism, I think that United States could beat us. And if we decide to pursue the green agenda, I think that Europe will be victorious in this regard, because it's something which is very much in European DNA. And as Commissioner Vestager said, we should be very proud of it. We have learned many things from our past, and as Professor Langner said, we should be also very proud of the whole scientific community in Europe. And I think that it was a very wise decision to combine the rebuilding strategy agenda of the European Union with the greening agenda. And I think that Europe has a lot to say in this regard, and a lot of knowledge and experience, and I think also helping hands to export to other regions willing to cooperate with us and get us off the climate change hook, so to say.
Okay, thanks. Professor?
Yes, I must confess that living long enough, I don't think that any big drama is ahead of us. I would even say that I much more believe in wisdom of the Chinese than the wisdom of many political people all over the world, because Chinese are not, at least they over 3,000 years, were not real invaders. They much more preferred the mingling with other cultures and making business in a very broad sense than just conquering, like let's say Mongols or some other fighting nations. But so I don't think that any big drama is ahead of us. But I guess that during last year we got a very important lessons. Either we cooperate on a global scale and we'll do things jointly, or Mother Nature will put us in the place we deserve, which means nowhere. So which simply means that we have to stop language based on what generals are trying to teach us. First of all, try to learn the other sides, because the point is that if the two persons are meeting each other, sooner or later they find a common language. And of course, the business is, in a broad sense, is a cooperation. because this is somebody to sell and somebody to buy. And this must be something to be traded off. And therefore, you know, science, so many times there were statements that's the end of history, the end of the physics, the end of chemistry. Sorry, this is a public place, but I will use a word starting from the B and the T at the very end. It's just a nonsense. The only thing which I believe we have to take into account is demography. The point is that over many centuries, slavery was a very popular way of working. Slavery is not yet gone, but it's almost gone. And that means, and this is another element which very few people know, illiteracy. 50 years ago, more or less 20% of mankind could read and write. And today, the illiteracy is less than 5%. Everybody knows how to use a smartphone. If you use the smartphone, you have to learn a little bit of mathematics, arithmetics, or whatever. Simply, we are entering in 21st century the era of brain. And people realize that. And the old statement that we have to teach, we have to educate each other is very valid. And Mother Nature just simply tells us every day, just don't be stupid, you fool. It's not economy, it's just the brain, the knowledge. And I think the Chinese are very good at that. They couldn't have done what they have done during the last 3 decades without using this recipe every day. So be happy.
Thank you.
And be optimistic.
Okay, very good. And Pawel, do you have a final comment?
I just have to confirm what Professor Langer said. The Chinese pragmatism and the experience of the last 30 years shows that they know how to deal with the world. It's just that the world has to learn how to deal with the Chinese, and that requires listening, not talking to. And once we start listening to each other and one another, it will be a little easier to reach the agreement. And I do hope we will do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I think it's a great panel today, and we've got a lot of things to think about and some great wisdom. Philippe?
Can I make a very small comment? Because I want to make a comment on Philippe. Because you see, some 500 years ago, it was a brave man whose name was Marco Polo. And this man traveled to China. And he was led to China, which was not so easy. And whatever is the story, whatever is true, doesn't matter. But he just went on long travel. And what I learned today is that there are new Marco Polos of today, and they are not just, you know, buying a ticket, but making an effort to learn and to tell, hi guys, I'm coming from another place. It's a very interesting place. Would you like to listen about that? Maybe then we make a business. So Philippe, thank you very much for all initiative. And I believe that it will be a super Sache taught called Rheinisch, however. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Jerzy. I'm really flattered by these kind words. It's been an amazing evening for me. I really want to express my gratitude for all of you who joined. And I just want to show you how the virtual reality environment looks like. So the people are sitting here. Part of our delegation has moved to Zoom, so it's not that crowded as it is sometimes before. And before we close the link to YouTube, I just want to mention the next event is taking place on the 6th of May. We will travel from Poland to Czechia and to Slovakia. And we will discuss the Digital Silk Road, meeting the topic of finance and banking. So whoever wants to join us, please drop me a message. You're all welcome to join. We will, of course, live stream our session to YouTube. And again, I would like to thank so much this amazing speakers, these amazing panelists that make it possible to have this amazing visit to Poland. Unfortunately, it's only virtual, but I think all of us are looking forward when the world is getting a little bit more normal. Honestly, I personally believe that the future of communication will be partly virtual. So I think there is no way back of only physical meetings. That's for sure. But I think there's a lot of changes coming up. And I think exactly these discussions that we just had today, they will help us all to better understand the dynamics of this new world order. And we're not speaking about one person or one country being superior to others. I think this panel discussion here has proved that there are so many things we can learn from the Chinese on eye level, and we need to be humble as Europeans and are willing to embrace the knowledge from other regions, the States, but also Africa. It's amazing what's going on in Africa that honestly I didn't have on my radar before I started my Silk Road 4.0 journey. So again, thank you very much. I will now close the link to YouTube. So thanks for all the visitors on YouTube. I'll just shut it down now. And